This is all absolutely staged. I mean, for starters, I'm using my left hand instead of my right. I can't write with my left hand. But even more depressing, I can't actually hold, because of my physical disability, I can't properly hold a thing like this and write either. So the whole thing was going to be sort of fake to begin with. Eagle eye, if you could figure that out just by looking at the thumbnail. I think I've explained my sort of physical disability before. I should say that this is the vlog for September 6th, 2018. But just in case I haven't, I'll briefly go over it. I can't turn both of my palms upward like this. I can do that with my right hand. There's a bone in my wrist that is fused to my forearm that prevents me from holding both of my palms this way. So that's as high as I can get. When I try and keep turning, I can get the fingers, but the rest of the hand can't go. And it doesn't really have much of an impact in my life. I can't play volleyball very well. If I do rock band, I get people the Jimi Hendrix achievement for playing left-handed, and I have a lot of trouble lifting couches, by the way you normally lift a couch. Other than that, I've been able to get through life with no real issues. I'm in much better spirits now than I was when I left work. I felt so drained. Every day lately has just felt like a complete at the end of the day. Partly probably because we're just working longer hours now. I have more day behind me when I finally finish work. And that's only been the case for me for about, well, all of August and part of July. So about a month and a half. And hopefully as I get used to it, I'll feel better when I'm coming home from work. But right now it's just, it's very draining. But I don't want to talk about what made my day miserable. And most of the day wasn't miserable. It was just at the end, everything seemed to pile up, and I was very tired by the time I finished all of it. Between working, actually, on my lunch break, really, and my afternoon break, I did a little bit of work on characters. That was actually what that was supposed to be me doing in the thumbnail and at the start of the video, was working on characters. It's all staged because I do all of my working on this laptop that I'm using to make the vlog. And I can't really show myself doing stuff on my laptop for a thumbnail for obvious reasons. But I've got a bit of a project that I've been working on. I'm going to be writing some prose. I think I might have mentioned this. I'm going to be writing some prose set in my campaign setting. And I'll try and link some of it maybe in my the description here once I have some of it. But as it's D&D, I'm trying to make it at least semi-authentic, so I've got all these characters. And today what I was doing was I was assigning their skills. And this I'm going to just take a moment to address. Skills were not a natural part of Dungeons and Dragons early on. The systems for performing actions and rules for attempting various actions were sort of random, and each different action sort of had different rules for how they were governed to try and sort of match the actual odds and randomness spread that you would have performing those actions. That was back in the earlier editions, like second edition. Second edition had some more structure, because I think, at least by that point, they were using the ability scores to influence a lot of these interactions. Ability scores have been very odd for a very long time because it used to be that charisma served very little purpose. Even up into third edition, there was only one major class that wanted charisma for its effects, and that was Bard. Bard in third edition had a number of magical or quasi-magical effects that depended heavily on what you could do with your charisma score. Um, but every other class, basically, you had a high charisma if you wanted to talk somebody into doing stuff, but most of the time people didn't bother because you might as well just put it all in your combat stats since a lot of times talking doesn't get you anywhere anyway, and you can't talk down a rust monster. So, they used charisma as a sort of dump stat. If they wanted to have a character that they could tell was pretty, then a lot of them made wisdom a dump score, unless they were like a cleric, a druid, or at the time a paladin, which also required high wisdom for its magical abilities. So, 3.5, I think, started to address that by adding a few more options. I can't remember exactly when the sorcerer class sort of gelled together. But 4th edition, for all of its many faults, was actually a very groundbreaking edition for incorporating the idea of certain classes using any of the 6 ability scores as a primary score. Sometimes maybe a little too much, and I'll get to that in a second. So the classes that were, about being big, strong melee fighters, especially characters wearing armor and heavy armor, that kind of thing, those used strength. So you had fighters, you had paladins, still using strength primarily, and you had barbarians. Did I say fighters, paladins, and barbarians. Barbarians definitely need a high strength score. Those are the guys that are going to run in and just pummel things with swords and clubs and all that good stuff. On the other hand, you had the classes that were more about nimble dexterity. So rogues, of course, being the primary dexterity class. Sneaking was always a dexterity kind of based skill. But also rangers, who moved away from strength to dexterity as sort of the important thing, with weapon options that didn't rely, even melee weapon options that didn't rely on pure strength. You also had wizards focused on intelligence for their spell casting, but now, in 4th edition, for the first time, you've got this warlock class. And warlock does something very interesting. Warlock is a spellcasting class, but it uses charisma to fuel its spells. Sorcerer does the same thing, and I really don't remember whether Sorcerer was a 3rd edition or a 4th edition, but in 4th edition it was definitely fueled by charisma, much like Warlock was, and Bard as well. So you have 3 classes now that really want high charisma, and the idea was that charisma now didn't just represent your sort of natural beauty or charm or charisma, but it was your force of personality, and it was an aspect of your own personal will and decisiveness. You with charisma, if you were using magic, it wasn't that you were just remembering arcane rituals and hand motions and then casting a spell. You were dominating magical forces with your personality to get them to do what you wanted, and it made sense for charisma to embody that. Wisdom remained the primary score now for clerics, but also druids, and I think druids had for a long time been wisdom based, but paladins, for their secondary score, were now using charisma again, force of personality, this time for being a justice kind of a thing. Rangers use wisdom for their spell casting, but wisdom wasn't a primary thing. But also, between 3rd and 4th edition, I think it was actually 3rd and 3.5, wisdom became the primary score for perception. Wisdom was no longer just being wise and having a fundamental understanding of the relationship between people. It was your ability to understand what is going on around you and how everything around you interacts. So wisdom became the score that you go to figure out what somebody is doing if they're lying, to figure out what you can see in an area, and your ability to sort of use your environment to your advantage for skills like survival. So wisdom became very useful for a variety of classes, and even characters that weren't divine in their nature of power were picking up wisdom just so that they would be better at knowing what was going on, anticipating surprise attacks, learning things from their environments, and so on. And if nothing else, 5th edition has done a good job of keeping things fast and simple. I remember a friend of mine when we were playing 4th edition. 4th edition was great for keeping track of stuff and giving you lots of options, my friend lamented that his level 1 character, a paladin, as it were, had to wait something like 6 minutes through rounds of combat to determine whether or not his single attack would hit. And when he realized that the things he was fighting would require him to roll 14 or better to damage on a 20-sided die once every 6 minutes, he got fed up. And I believe that was the last time I ever saw him or heard about him playing Dungeons & Dragons. And that was the thing with 4th edition, is that while it had lots of cool things that you could do, lots of options for combining effects from different classes, all of these things had rules, and they had some pretty complicated rules, and that bogged everything down. And having run a couple combats in Dungeons & Dragons, being the dungeon master, you're always busy. There's always a lot of stuff to do. You keep track of what he's doing, she's doing, he's doing, and what your monsters are doing. But it seems like it just goes smoother and quicker. And certainly watching Critical Role, their combats, while they take a while, a combat might take half an hour to an hour, depending on the complexity of the encounter. The moment-to-moment action, they're getting through a round of combat within, 3 to 5 minutes. 5 minutes even seems long. Like 3 minutes is usually enough to get everybody to do something. And the only time it really gets drawn out is when people are starting to describe, crazy actions or trying to decide what their character is going to do and going, I don't know if I should do this. Could I do that? What do you guys think? And that's going to happen in D&D forever, basically. But it is a much better system now. Now I just need to figure out which of these skills and how the ability scores interact with them I'm going to give my curious cast of characters, which I might talk about some other time. Might be a good one for the weekend, actually. Till then, I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be